Welcome back, guys, to Blackout War Stories. 74% of you still haven't subscribed. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. They told us the fortress didn't exist. On paper, it wasn't there, no coordinates, no orders mentioning its walls, no photographs filed in the archives. But on the cold morning of October 17, 1943, I was standing at its gates, my boots pressing into the damp mud that clung like tar to every step. The air reeked of oil and gunpowder, even though no gun had been fired yet. We were told it was just another patrol, just another sweep along a ridge nobody cared about. But I knew from the way our lieutenant kept checking his watch that something was off. The fortress rose from the mist like a half-buried giant, the kind of structure built to be forgotten. Its walls weren't the neat stones of castles I'd seen in books as a boy. These were jagged slabs of concrete, patched with steel plates, scarred by something older than our war. The place held its breath, even crows kept off the barbed wire spiraling over the trench. And yet, the ground vibrated faintly under my boots as if machinery deep within those walls was still awake. We were 8 men that morning, each of us carrying rifles that felt heavier than they should. No jokes, no chatter, not even the usual curses at the mud. When you march towards something nobody's supposed to know about, words dry up fast. Still, silence has its own sound. The rasp of gear straps, the faint metallic clink of loose rounds, the shallow breaths of men trying not to think about why they're there. That's what I remember most, the weight of silence pressing harder than the gear on my back. Corporal Hensley, always the loud one, broke it first. "Looks abandoned," he muttered, squinting at the gate. "Rust on the hinges. Probably rats guarding the place." Nobody laughed. Our lieutenant shot him a look sharp enough to cut through the fog. Hensley shut his mouth, but the damage was done. Once one man voices doubt, everyone feels it crawling into their thoughts. The gate creaked open without a fight, no lock, no chain, just a heavy push and a groan that echoed into the hollow yard beyond. Inside, the fortress smelled of damp stone and stale fuel, the kind of air that sits heavy in your chest. The yard stretched wide, littered with broken crates, rusted drums, and a single truck with its tires sunk halfway into the earth. But no footprints, no cigarette butts, no trace of the men who must have built this place. And that's when we heard it. A low hum. At first I thought it was in my head, like the ringing you get after a blast. But then the others froze, their eyes darting in the same direction toward the main structure in the center of the yard. The sound came from beneath it, steady, mechanical, alive. "Power?" Sergeant Keene whispered. "In a place that doesn't exist?" I whispered back. We advanced, rifles ready, our boots crunching on gravel that hadn't been disturbed in months. The steel door at the base of the structure stood slightly ajar, a sliver of blackness breathing out a draft colder than the morning air. I reached it first. My hand hesitated on the handle, slick with condensation. Inside, the corridor stretched downward, lit by faint bulbs that shouldn't have been working. The hum grew louder, pulsing like a heartbeat buried in stone. My stomach turned not from fear, not yet, but from the certainty that we had crossed into something no patrol was meant to see. Lieutenant ordered us in. One by one, we stepped into the fortress, swallowed by its belly. The outside world vanished behind us. The fog, the mud, the trees gone. Only concrete walls and that sound remained. We walked for what felt like an hour, though it was probably minutes. The corridor split into multiple passages, some blocked by debris, others descending deeper. Each step seemed to drag me further from the war I thought I was fighting. We weren't chasing soldiers here. We were chasing shadows. At the end of the main hall, we found a chamber. My breath caught. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, each marked with numbers that didn't match any system I knew. In the center stood a large table, maps pinned under glass. But the maps weren't of any front we'd been briefed on. No towns, no borders, just shaded zones, circles drawn around empty land. Hensley whistled under his breath. "What the hell is this place?" Nobody answered. We all knew the truth. Whatever this fortress was, it wasn't meant for men like us. And then I noticed it, a smear of fresh mud on the floor, leading away from the table. disappearing into another dark passage. Someone had been here, recently. The hum grew louder, almost urgent, as if the walls themselves were warning us. My finger tightened on the trigger of my rifle, though I had nothing to aim at. That's when the lights flickered, and we realized we weren't alone. The lights buzzed once, then steadied, casting long shadows across the chamber. Every man in the squad froze, our rifles pointed at empty space, our eyes darting toward corners that gave nothing back. But the feeling, that undeniable sense of being watched, stayed heavy in the air. We stood there in silence, listening to the hum under the floor and the faint crackle of bulbs above us. Finally, Lieutenant raised his hand and spoke in a low voice. "Fan out. Check everything. Quietly." I moved left, sweeping my rifle across the rows of filing cabinets. Each drawer was labeled with strange numbers, long strings like 14-73-4B. They meant nothing to me. When I tried to pull one open, it stuck, locked tight. Every cabinet was sealed. Whoever had built this fortress wanted to keep whatever was inside locked away. Across the chamber, Hensley crouched by the muddy smear. "Fresh," he muttered, running a finger across it. "Less than a day old." That turned my stomach. If someone had been here less than 24 hours ago, then where were they now? The lieutenant didn't answer him. Instead, he walked to the table in the middle of the room. He stared at the maps under glass, his jaw tight, then gave a short order. "Pack this up. Take photos." Keene, our sergeant, frowned. "Sir, we don't have a camera." "I know," the lieutenant said flatly. "Then draw. Copy it down, every line, every circle." We all exchanged glances. Soldiers aren't trained for cartography, but orders were orders. I pulled a notebook from my pack and started sketching one of the maps, my hands shaking just enough to make the pencil scratch unevenly. The shaded zones made no sense. They weren't battlefields or cities, just large circles drawn around forests, valleys, stretches of countryside. At the edges of some circles, numbers were scribbled, like coordinates stripped of their context. It was then that I realized something. None of the zones were on enemy territory. Every circle was drawn over land we controlled. I wanted to ask what that meant, but my gut told me not to. Soldiers who ask too many questions rarely like the answers they get. While we sketched, Keene found a stack of small folders tucked into a corner of the table. Most were empty, but a few had single pages inside. He pulled one out, squinting in the dim light. "There's nothing but names," he whispered. "What kind of names?" I asked. He showed me the page. I recognized none of them: German, French, even a few that looked Russian. But they weren't generals or known officers. They were ordinary names, like the ones you'd hear in a village. Civilians. Hensley crossed himself under his breath. Why the hell would a place like this keep lists of farmers and tailors? No one replied. The lieutenant finally spoke. "We take what we can, then we move. This is above our grade, way above." His voice carried something I'd never heard before, not fear, but restraint, like a man who had seen a fire and was pretending it was just smoke. We hauled ourselves out of the chamber and back into the corridor. The hum seemed louder now, vibrating through the walls like a living thing. Each step made my teeth buzz. At the surface, the fog had thinned. The fortress yard lay open and empty, the truck still sunk in its grave of mud. I breathed deeper, grateful for the air, though it still stank of oil. We regrouped at the gate. Nobody spoke until we were sure we were alone outside. Then Hensley finally broke. "This wasn't a patrol," he snapped. "We weren't supposed to see this." Keene turned on him. "Shut it." "He's right," I muttered before I could stop myself. "This fortress isn't on the map. The maps inside weren't of enemy ground. And those names," the lieutenant cut me off. "None of this leaves your mouths." "Understood?" His eyes swept across us, hard and unblinking. We all gave the same nod, some slower than others. I felt my throat tighten. Soldiers live on secrecy, but this was something different. This was a secret even the army didn't want in its own records. That night, we camped 2 miles away in a wooded gully. The ground was wet and cold, and the fire we built was nothing more than a weak orange flicker. Nobody slept well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those maps and circles glowing behind my eyelids. Keene sat beside me, rubbing his hands together. "You know what I think?" he whispered. I looked at him, waiting. I think the enemy didn't build that place. I frowned. Then who? Us, he said quietly. Or at least someone on our side. You saw those zones. Why mark our own land unless you're watching it for something? The thought chilled me more than the night air. If the fortress was ours, then why hide it from the men who bled on the front lines every day? Why keep it off maps, off orders, off the very fabric of truth we were supposed to trust? I didn't answer him. Some questions aren't meant to be spoken twice. Morning came gray and damp. We packed quickly, moving out before the mist lifted. The lieutenant didn't mention the fortress, didn't write a report, didn't mark anything in his book. As far as the record would show, that patrol never happened. But something inside me shifted. Once you've seen a place the world denies, every other order feels different. You start asking yourself, what else is missing from the paper trail? What else is carved out of silence? Back at command post 3 days later, the war returned to its usual rhythm. Shells, mud, hunger, the endless grind of holding ground inch by inch. But the fortress stayed lodged in my skull like shrapnel that couldn't be removed. One evening while sorting rations, I caught Keen staring at me. His face was tight, eyes darker than usual. You still thinking about it? He asked. Every day. He nodded slowly. Good. Means you're not blind yet. I wanted to press him, but voices approached and the moment ended. In war, private words are rare and dangerous. 2 weeks later, we were sent on another patrol. Different valley, different ridge. But halfway through the march, I noticed something on the lieutenant's map. A small mark, barely visible, scratched into the corner. A circle, not part of the official route. I knew that shape. I'd drawn it myself inside that fortress. And that's when the pieces started to fall together. I couldn't take my eyes off that little circle. It was faint, drawn in pencil, easy to miss unless you were looking for it. But I had seen the same kind of marks inside that fortress. My hand had traced one on paper, copying the map under glass. And now, one of those marks was on our lieutenant's patrol sheet. I didn't say a word at first. We were marching in silence, mud sucking at our boots, the ridge line stretching ahead. But the more I stared at it, the heavier it felt in my mind. When we stopped to drink water, I edged closer to Keen. I kept my voice low. You see that? He followed my eyes to the map. His jaw tightened. I see it. You think it's the same? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That patrol was supposed to last 2 days. Just a sweep of the valley, then back to camp. But on the second night, as the rain hammered down on our tarps, the lieutenant gave new orders. We're heading east at first light, he said. Change of route. Nobody questioned him out loud, but I saw the looks pass between the men. East wasn't where command had told us to go. East was toward that faint little circle. Hensley grumbled under his breath once the lieutenant was out of earshot. We're dogs chasing ghosts again. Keen shot him a glare, but even he didn't argue this time. The rain let up by dawn, leaving the ground slick and heavy. We trudged on, the forest closing in tighter with every mile. Around midday, we reached it. Another structure, half hidden by trees and overgrowth. Not as large as the first fortress, but built from the same concrete and steel. Its walls were scarred by weather, vines clawing up the sides. The entrance yawned black, like it had been waiting for us. This isn't on any chart, one of the younger privates whispered. No, Keen muttered, but it's on his. He nodded toward the lieutenant, who stood staring at the door like he already knew what was inside. I felt my stomach twist. One fortress could be explained as abandoned enemy ground. 2 marked in secret on our own maps? That meant something bigger. The lieutenant ordered us in. The inside was nearly the same. Concrete halls humming deep below. Faint light still working, even though no generator was in sight. This one had fewer rooms, but we found another chamber with tables and cabinets. The same strange markings, the same locked drawers, and another set of maps. I moved closer, heart pounding. These maps showed different zones, circles placed farther north, closer to towns we knew. One of the towns was where we'd been stationed just a month earlier. Keen leaned over my shoulder. They're tracking us, he whispered. I shook my head. Not us. Something else. something moving across those areas. We both stared, neither of us daring to guess what that something was. Then came the sound. At first I thought it was the hum again, but this was sharper. A metallic clang echoing from deeper inside the fortress. We froze, rifles snapping up. The clang came again, followed by faint footsteps. Someone was here. The lieutenant motioned us forward. We moved down a side corridor, rifles raised, nerves stretched thin. My heartbeat was louder than my boots. At the end of the corridor, a door stood slightly open. Light spilled through the crack. The lieutenant pushed it open, and we stormed inside. The room was empty, just a desk, a chair, and papers scattered across the floor. But the chair was still rocking, as if someone had just left it. We searched fast, every corner, every shadow. Nothing. Whoever had been there slipped away in seconds. But the papers, they were worse than the silence. Keen snatched one up, eyes darting across the page. His face went pale. He handed it to me. Not English, not German. I couldn't place it, but on the top corner, a stamp was clear enough. Our Army's insignia. How the hell, I muttered. The lieutenant snatched it from me, shoved the whole pile into his pack and barked, "We're leaving. Now." We pulled out fast, the unease heavy in every step. Back in the trees, I felt like eyes were on us the whole way. Every snapping twig made me whip my rifle around. When we finally stopped to catch breath, Hensley exploded. "This isn't right!" We're walking into places nobody's supposed to know about, finding papers with our damn insignia, and chasing shadows that disappear in front of us. "What are we doing out here?" The lieutenant's stare cut him down. "You'll do your duty, Corporal." But his voice cracked just slightly at the edges, and I caught it. He was just as shaken as we were. That night, sleep was impossible. My mind spun with questions. Why did these fortresses hum with power? Why were the maps marking our land, not the enemy's? Why did papers stamped with our insignia carry words none of us could read? The worst thought of all kept gnawing at me. If someone had been sitting in that chair, who were they working for? The next day, the lieutenant led us further east. No explanation, just orders. The forest thinned into rolling hills, the mud drying into cracked earth. And then from the ridge, we saw it. A convoy, trucks, at least 6 of them, crawling along a dirt road below. But they weren't marked. No flags, no numbers, nothing. Men rode in the back, uniforms hidden under tarps. We dropped flat, watching. The trucks slowed near a small farmhouse, the kind barely standing. Men jumped out, carrying crates between them. The way they moved, quick, precise. Like this wasn't their first time. "What do you think's in those crates?" Hensley asked under his breath. "Not food," Keen muttered. I stared through my sights, watching one man pry open a crate just enough for a glimpse inside. I couldn't see much, but I caught the gleam of metal tubes stacked together. Not rifles, not shells, something else. The lieutenant ordered us back. "We've seen enough." But I wanted to stay. I wanted to know more. Still, orders are orders. We pulled away. The sight of those unmarked trucks burned into our minds. Back at camp 3 days later, everything felt wrong. The war had its rhythm fire missions, supply drops, the constant grind, but after what we'd seen, none of it felt real anymore. It felt like a play staged in front of us, while something else ran behind the curtain. Keen cornered me one evening. "They're moving something through those fortresses," he said. "Those convoys are part of it. Whatever it is, it's not in the reports. It's not for us to know." "And if we do know?" I asked. He stared at me, eyes tired. "Then we don't live long enough to tell it." His words settled like ice in my chest. But fate didn't let us walk away. A week later, new orders arrived. Another patrol, different valley. Same strange pencil mark on the lieutenant's map. By then, I knew the pattern. And I knew we were walking straight into something we weren't supposed to survive. The new patrol began like all the others. Boots on mud, rifles slung heavy on shoulders, and silence stretched too thin between us. But I already knew where we were heading. I had seen the faint circle on the lieutenant's map. It didn't matter what orders we were given on paper, those circles had become our true destinations. The younger privates followed without question. To them, a patrol was a patrol, no matter how strange the route. But for men like me, who had walked into 2 fortresses and seen maps that shouldn't exist, every step forward felt like a gamble we hadn't agreed to. We reached the valley by dusk. The land dipped into a natural bowl, hidden from view by ridges on every side. At the far end, almost swallowed by the slope, stood another bunker. This one looked newer, sharper edges, cleaner lines, no vines crawling the walls yet. It hadn't been abandoned to weather. It was being used. The lieutenant raised his hand. We crouched low, scanning the area. Smoke drifted faintly from a vent pipe above the structure. Power was running, no question about it. Hensley muttered, "If this is abandoned, I'll eat my rifle." The lieutenant's glare silenced him. Then he gave the order, "Advance." The door was heavier than the others, reinforced steel with bolts as thick as my wrist. But it wasn't locked. It opened under our push, groaning as if protesting what we were about to do. Inside, the corridor was wider, cleaner. The hum here wasn't faint. It was loud, steady, a constant vibration in the walls. Lights glowed brighter than the last 2 bunkers. Someone was maintaining this place. We moved slowly, rifles up. Every sense screamed that we weren't alone. Halfway down the hall, we heard voices. The lieutenant froze, raised his fist, and we pressed ourselves against the wall. The voices were muffled but close, men speaking in low tones, words I couldn't place. Not German, not Russian, and not our language either. The lieutenant motioned to move. We slid toward the sound, hearts pounding. At the end of the hall, a door stood open, just a crack, light spilling through. We inched forward and peered inside. My breath caught. There were 3 men around a table. Their uniforms had no markings, no flags, no insignia. Just plain fabric, as if stripped of identity. On the table were crates, the same kind we had seen loaded onto those unmarked trucks. One of the men pulled a metal tube from a crate and laid it on the table. It wasn't a shell. It wasn't a rifle part. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't standard issue. The lieutenant gestured for us to hold. We stayed low, barely breathing, listening. One of the men spoke louder, and this time I caught a word I recognized. It was English. Not perfect, but enough. "Delivery, tomorrow." Another answered in a language I didn't know. Then, without warning, the lieutenant stepped forward, pushing the door wide, rifle leveled. "Hands where I can see them!" We stormed in behind him. The men froze, their eyes wide. One reached for the table. Keen fired first, a burst of rounds cracking the silence. The man dropped. The others raised their hands slowly, faces pale but unreadable. The lieutenant barked, "Who are you?" Neither answered. They stood still, hands high, eyes locked on us. Not enemy, not ally. Something else entirely. Hensley spat on the floor. "They ain't soldiers." The lieutenant's jaw tightened. "Bind them." We tied their wrists with rope, forced them against the wall. But even bound, their eyes never left us. No fear, no panic. Just calm, steady silence. That silence scared me more than anything. We searched the crates. More of those tubes stacked in rows, wrapped in cloth. None of us knew what they were. One private swore they were some kind of rocket parts. Another said fuel canisters. But they were too small for that. Keen muttered, "Whatever it is, they don't want it on any manifest." The lieutenant cut him off. "Load what we can. Destroy the rest." So we did. We hauled as many tubes as we could carry out into the courtyard, then set charges on the rest. The blast shook the ground, smoke rolling into the sky. When the dust cleared, the 2 captured men were gone. Ropes, cut clean. No scuff, no struggle, no sound. Just empty space where they had been. Hensley swore. Impossible. We had eyes on them. But they were gone, like smoke through cracks. The lieutenant's face went pale. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked lost. Then he pulled himself together and snapped, "We're moving out. Now." We retreated fast, slipping through trees as night closed in. Every shadow felt alive, every gust of wind like footsteps behind us. None of us spoke until we made camp miles away. That night, Keen sat across from me, face lit by the weak fire. He leaned forward, his voice low. "You know what this means, don't you?" I shook my head. "Tell me." "It means this isn't about the enemy. It's not about territory or battles or the damn war we're fighting. These places, these bunkers, they're part of something else. Something we're not supposed to see. His words settled heavy in my chest. He was right. I had felt it from the first fortress, but now it was undeniable. The war outside, the one with tanks and shells and trenches, was only the surface. Beneath it, another war was being fought in silence, and we had stumbled straight into it. The next morning we returned to camp. The lieutenant reported nothing unusual. No mention of the bunker, the crates, or the men we'd seen vanish. On paper, it was just another uneventful patrol. But I knew better. We all did. That night, lying awake on my cot, I realized something that froze me deeper than the cold ever could. If the lieutenant's maps had those circles, then he wasn't just following orders, he was part of it. And if he was part of it, then we weren't witnesses anymore. We were liabilities. Sleep didn't come. I lay on my cot staring at the canvas above me, listening to camp noises fade into the kind of quiet that feels staged. The thought looped until it made me sick. If the circles were on his map, he wasn't just following, he was guiding. And if he was guiding, then we were walking where someone wanted us to vanish. Before dawn, the lieutenant shook us awake for routine checks. No mess line, no word from command. He kept his voice level, the way a man talks when he's already made a decision. We formed up outside the tents, gear on, rifles slung. The field smelled of wet earth and old smoke. Keene took his usual place on my right. Hensley stood behind us, chewing a dead twig like it might turn into tobacco if he wished it hard enough. The lieutenant stepped in front of us, map in hand. We moved west to the river, follow it to the rail cut, then loop back to the ridge. Quick sweep, no delays. I watched his eyes as he spoke. They never met ours. They skimmed over us like we were lines on a page. We set off at a steady pace, boots thudding in rhythm, breath fogging the cold. The sun tried to break through the clouds and failed. We crossed scrub, then low brush, then firs that crowded close like they didn't want to let us pass. After an hour, we reached the river, fast, brown, carrying tiny whirlpools that caught the light. We followed the bank south. The rail cut would be half a mile on, carved through a slope of chalk and clay. I kept scanning for movement and for something else and out that didn't exist yet. Keene edged closer. "Stay on me," he murmured, "no matter what." I nodded. It wasn't an order. It was a promise between men who had carried each other over too many miles to count. We reached the rail cut near mid-morning. The trench was deep and straight, with timber ties pulled up and stacked in piles like ribs. A single signal mast leaned over the gap, its glass shattered. I saw no tracks. I saw no reason to be here unless the circle said so. "Down," the lieutenant said. "We take the floor of the cut." Less sky over us. We slid down chalk that crumbled under our hands. Mud gripped our ankles at the bottom. The walls rose on both sides, high enough to kill the wind and trap any sound we made. My ribs tightened. We moved forward 2 by 2. 50 yards in, the cut hooked left, a blind corner. The lieutenant raised his hand. We stopped. Then I heard it, metal on stone, faint and wrong. Not wind, not a bird. Keene heard it too. His palm found my sleeve and squeezed once. The lieutenant stepped to the bend, rifle high, and snapped his fingers. 2 privates moved with him, quick and low. They never reached the corner. Gunfire poured from the bend in a clean, controlled burst. The 2 men dropped without a cry. The lieutenant dove back as rounds chewed chalk from the wall over our heads. We hit the mud, every muscle firing, returning shots at shadows we couldn't see. "Flank!" the lieutenant shouted. "Up the wall on them!" "Too steep!" Keene barked back. "They've got the angle!" More rounds snapped past. Whoever they were close. They knew the ground, and they didn't miss. I saw a muzzle flash in the gloom and answered with short, angry bursts. The flash vanished. Another opened up from higher on the wall. I caught a blur of a man in plain cloth. No markings. Then he was gone. Hensley crawled beside me, face chalk white in the cut. "Those the same bastards from the bunker?" "Move!" the lieutenant yelled. "We push through!" He sprinted low and fast toward the corner, pulling smoke grenades from his belt. He threw 2. They landed short, hissed, and filled the space with thick white that curled like milk in water. The gunfire slowed. He waved us forward and we moved, slipping on mud. hearts hunting for a pace that didn't exist. We reached the bend in a knot, Keen at point, me on his shoulder. Through smoke, shapes flitted on the slope above 2, then 3, then nothing. I fired at movement, at the small triangle where a shoulder meets a wall. A man lurched and vanished back over the rim. We gained 3 yards, then 5, then 10. The cut straightened into a long throat. The smoke thinned, and the sound changed a deep, low growl of an engine somewhere ahead, hidden by the turn of the trench. "Truck," Keen said. "Not our," I answered. We pushed again. Hensley covered, shouting something I didn't hear. A round clipped my pack and spun me sideways. Keen hauled me back by the strap, dragged me to the wall, pressed my face into chalk to make me breathe. "Save it," he snapped. "We need you alive." The engine roared louder. A shadow moved across the far end of the cut. I saw a grill, too clean for this place, a hood without a number, tires thick with wide treads. Unmarked. Familiar. "Down!" I shouted. The truck's front wheels hit the cut floor, grinding into mud. A gunner rose from the bed, not a heavy, not a tripod, something short, compact, wrong. He braced it on the cab roof and opened fire. The rounds didn't sound like ours. They had a flat crack that felt like they were cutting the air instead of punching it. Chalk shredded from the walls. Splinters of timber ties spun like knives. A private screamed and fell on his back, clutching his thigh. Keen rolled away and fired in quick, disciplined taps at the gunner. The gunner jerked, dropped behind the cab, then popped up again a foot to the right. I put 3 rounds where his head would be and saw a spray. He slid out of sight. The truck kept grinding forward, pushing mud like a plow. Men jumped from the bed, 2 on each side, boots landing in silence like they'd rehearsed it. Plain jackets, clean faces, calm eyes. The lieutenant rose from a crouch and charged. He didn't yell. He didn't look at us. He sprinted for the driver's door like the truck belonged to him. For a heartbeat, I thought he had lost his mind. Then I saw the truth cut through the smoke like a wire. The driver didn't aim at him. He leaned out and pulled the door handle from the inside. The lieutenant grabbed the door, swung himself up, and fired 3 rounds into the cab where the passenger would be. He wasn't stopping the truck, he was taking it. "Hold!" Keen roared at me, but my body had already chosen. I ran at the lieutenant with the last bit of climb still in my legs. The driver's arm rose with a pistol. I fired once, hitting forearm. The pistol spun away into the mud. The lieutenant turned on the step, eyes bright and empty, and pointed his pistol at my chest. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We both knew the line we had reached. Keen's shot cracked from my right. The lieutenant's shoulder snapped back. He fell from the step, hit the mud hard, rolled, tried to rise, slipped, and stayed on his knees, breathing like a man who had run too far. The driver had dropped. The truck coughed and died. Silence fell like a lid. Hensley's rifle barked twice more and then stopped. The men in plain coats melted backward along the upper rim, moving like water flowing downhill, gone between trees before we could climb to chase. I stood over the lieutenant, chest heaving, rifle pointed at the ground, because I wanted to believe this was still a war with rules. He looked up at me with no hate, no fear, only a tired kind of relief that I didn't understand. "It was never your road," he said. "Whose then?" I asked. He gave a tight smile that tried to be kind and failed. "Not yours." Keen came in hard, ripped the map case from the lieutenant's shoulder, and tossed it to me. "Open it." My hands shook as I worked the straps. Inside were papers thick with stamps I didn't know, signatures that looked like scratches, and a small book bound in oilcloth. The first page showed a list of sites with circles beside them, the same hand that had drawn the marks we followed. The second page was worse, a roster with names I knew. Hensley Keen, me, each with a date next to it. No ranks, no unit, just names and dates. "What are these?" I asked. The lieutenant stared at the ground. "Clearance windows." "For what?" "So no one sees who's passing through," he said softly. I flipped more pages. Cargo manifest with no cargo listed. Routes with no towns. Notes that read like someone had tried to say something with as few words as possible until the truth disappeared between them. "Who are they?" Keen asked. "The men in plain coats." The lieutenant closed his eyes. "Moving parts." "Parts of what?" "Make it simple," he said. "Tell your head it was an ambush by the enemy. You fought. You won. You came home. That's the story you can live with." He breathed out, slow and careful. "I kept you alive as long as I could." "By marching us into a kill pocket," Keen snapped. "By flagging your route," the lieutenant said. "By telling them we were always late." My mouth went dry. I saw the gaps, suddenly the delays, the sudden course changes, the way we always arrived after the trucks had passed or just before, never when the cut was full of men. "You sent the smoke short," I said, "in the rail cut." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Hensley staggered over, splattered with chalk and mud, face hollowed out by adrenaline. "Who do we shoot now?" he asked. He wasn't joking. "Not him," Keen said, but it sounded like he was testing the words, not stating them. I looked at the lieutenant's wounded shoulder. Blood soaked his sleeve. The color spread in a patient circle. He didn't seem to notice. "What's in the crates?" I asked. His eyes found mine and held. "Not a weapon you know." "Fuel? Tubes? Guidance?" "A story with a longer tail than you think," he said. "One that keeps running when bodies stop." He winced and gripped his arm. "You want to win your war? Fine. Hold a ridge. Take a bridge. Plant a flag. But this," he nodded toward the oilcloth book, "this wins the next one before you even hear it start." Hensley swore under his breath. Keen said nothing, which was worse. "Help me up," the lieutenant said. Keen didn't move. "Please," the lieutenant added, and the words sounded like it had cost him something he didn't have to spare. We pulled him to his feet. He swayed but stayed upright. We formed a small, broken circle in the cut, the truck hulking beside us like a hushed witness. "Decision time," the lieutenant said. "You can radio this. You can drag me in. You can hand over those papers, and you can tell someone 3 levels up a story they already rewrote, or..." He looked hard at me. "You can put the book in your pack, burn the rest, and take your men out of here while you still can." "Why us?" I asked. "Why any of this?" "Because the fortress didn't exist," he said, "and you kept walking anyway." He nodded to the far end of the cut. "There's a spur that leads to the road. Another convoy is due within the hour. More men in plain coats, more crates. If they find us, no one writes the ending." I looked at Keen. He looked back the way a man does when he's handing you your own choice because he's tired of seeing choices made for him. We moved fast. We stripped what we could from the truck. Maps in the glove box, a small tin stamped with a symbol I didn't recognize, a roll of cable, a hand lamp that clicked with a steady, cold light. We stacked the rest crates, fuel cans, tarps in the deepest part of the cut. Keen set charges. Hensley passed the fuses with hands that stopped shaking the moment there was work to do. I took the oilcloth book and slipped it beneath my shirt, close to the heat of my chest, where it felt like a hard second heart. The lieutenant watched without a word. When the last fuse was run, I gave him a canteen. He drank and handed it back like it hurt. We pulled back to the bend. Keen looked at me. I raised my palm. He nodded once and thumbed the plunger. The cut erupted in a rolling, layered roar. The truck lifted and slammed sideways, coughing black into the sky. Timber ties spun end over end like flung hammers. Chalk dust billowed and filled my mouth with a taste like pennies. When the clouds settled, the truck was a bent carcass, and the crates were splinters the size of my finger. We climbed out by a goat path that clawed up the wall. At the rim, I scanned the trees. No movement. No men in plain coats. Not yet. "Which way?" Hensley asked. "North," Keen said. "Off the line." "Through the woods. We don't touch the roads." The lieutenant stood a few steps behind us, breathing hard. He looked smaller in the open air, like the cut had held him up. I felt an old habit tug at me to ask for orders. I bit it back. "Can you walk?" I asked. He smiled without humor. "I can until I can't." We started moving. Single file with Keen in front, me behind, the lieutenant in the middle, and Hensley covering our tail. The woods closed around us and softened the sound of our steps. Branches swayed and let flecks of pale light fall on leaf litter that smelled like wet paper. After 20 minutes, the lieutenant stumbled. We caught him. He wasn't light. He gritted his teeth and nodded us on. We slowed, not enough to be caught, enough to keep him upright. At a shallow ravine, he stopped and looked back the way we'd come. His face had gone gray. "You ruined a schedule that wasn't meant to slip," he said. Good, Hensley said. He shook his head. No, you moved a storm. I felt the book's edges press against my ribs with each breath. I adjusted my sling and kept moving. The ground tipped upward into a slope pocked with roots. At the top, through trees, I saw the low black line of something I had hoped never to see again. Concrete, steel, a familiar shape half buried in earth. The first fortress, crouching on the ridge like it had known we'd need it sooner or later. Hensley exhaled a laugh that wasn't a laugh. Home sweet nowhere. Keen's face set. We hold there, he said. We patch him up. We read what we need to read. Then we decide if we shout or run. I looked at the sky. It had the color of metal that's been handled too much. Somewhere behind us, down in the cut, an engine coughed to life. Another convoy right on time. We stepped toward the fortress that didn't exist, and I knew the next door we opened would decide whether the story ended with us or kept writing itself without our names. The fortress door gave that same slow groan as before. We slipped inside and sealed it behind us, stacking a rail tie we'd dragged from the slope across the entrance as a brace. The wiring throbbed like a dull heartbeat. Lights flickered, then settled. Dust hung in the air, catching the weak bulbs like fog underwater. We moved fast. Keen took point down the main hall. I stayed with the lieutenant and Hensley, covering our rear. The walls were damp and cold. My palms stuck to the rifle. It felt like the place was breathing through the vents, steady and unbothered by anything we had done outside. In the central chamber, we found what we needed. A table, a metal locker, a sink with a slow drip, rags stiff with old grease. Hensley tore open his kit and went to work on the lieutenant's shoulder. The round had punched through muscle and clipped the edge of bone. He clenched his jaw while we cleaned it. He didn't make a sound. When Hensley pushed the needle through, his fingers trembled once, then steadied. I set the oilcloth book on the table and kept my hand on it like it might try to run. Keen checked the corridors, clicked the lamp off and on twice, and came back with a nod. Clear for now. The lieutenant watched us with a tired focus. You still have it, he said, looking at the book. I'm not letting it go, I said. Good, he answered, and surprised me. Someone should read the truth at least once. Hensley tied the sling and stepped back. He'll keep the arm if we don't ask it to be brave. He wiped his hands on a rag. What now? Keen looked at me. I opened the book. The first pages were route tables, but not like any I'd seen. Each line had a date, a window, a circle number, and a word that wasn't a place. Parity, hush, transit, return. The next pages were rosters of teams with no names, only initials and a single digit. After that came brief notes, written tight, each like a nail set flush with the wood. Asset handed, no eye. Cover letter delivered. Witness risk contained. The last section held simple maps with the same soft pencil circles. On the side of one map, a phrase was printed in block letters, quiet corridors. I ran my fingers down the words like they were braille. I wanted them to rise up and explain themselves. They didn't. They sat there, sure of their plain clothes, waiting for someone to decide whether to believe them. What are quiet corridors? I asked. The lieutenant's eyes drifted to the vent as if he could see through stone. Paths where nothing official happens but a lot changes. For who? For the next fight, he said. For the one after that. Keen leaned over the book. Are we moving weapons? Sometimes, the lieutenant said. Men? I asked. Sometimes, he said again. Information? Keen pressed. Always. Hensley let out a breath. So our war is a mask. The lieutenant shook his head. No, your war is real. Men die for ground. Men die for each other. But under it, hands trade things the maps don't show. Those trades bend the next war before anyone hears the first shot. This place, he added, looking at the walls, keeps the bend quiet. We stood there with that truth sitting between us like a crate we didn't want to open. Far off, a sound rolled through the vent, faint but growing. An engine, then another. The convoy had reached the ridge. Keen snapped back to the room. We can't hold here if they come down the slope. They won't, the lieutenant said. This door is a dead lead. There's a service exit to the dry ditch. They'll watch the obvious way and leave the back loose. They always do. How do you know? Hensley asked. Because I told them how to search, the lieutenant said, and gave a tired half smile that had no pride in it. We killed the chamber lights and moved through the halls by the hand lamp. The hum filled the dark like a low tide. At a junction, we found a metal panel with a lever that had a tag wired to it. EMERGRUN. I pulled it. Somewhere deeper, something spun up. Fans roared, lights flicked in sections like a moving wave. Outside, a siren yelped once, then steadied into a long, mean tone. "What did you do?" Keen asked. "Gave them a different story," I said. "If they hear a siren, maybe they think we're too deep to flush. Maybe they mark this one as hot and move on." We reached the service exit. The door was narrow, pinned by rust. Keen threw his shoulder into it. The hinge snapped with a loud, ugly crack that made us all wince. We stepped into a dry ditch lined with stone. Brambles snagged our sleeves. Above us, the sky was flat and close. We stopped to listen. Engines were nearer, but not at the door. Voices carried from the tree line, careful and unhurried. A whistle peeped twice. Another answered once. Their signals, not ours. We slid along the ditch, slow and low. The lieutenant's breath rasped. Hensley took his weight without being asked. Keen scouted ahead and raised a hand now and then to keep our pace right. At a bend, we crouched. Through the brush, we saw them. 4 figures at the main gate. Plain jackets, faces calm. One held a sheet of paper and pointed to the ground. 2 others set something by the wall and stepped back. A flash flared, then smoke. For a 6-second, I thought they were going to bring the place down with us inside. But the charge was small, marking, not killing. They wanted a record to show a search done. They wanted the shape of action more than its weight. "They're filing a memory," Keen whispered. "Paper that says they worked," I said. We slid on until the ditch ended under a low shelf of rock. We crossed to the shadow of pines and kept moving until the sound of the siren was a thin thread behind us. The ground softened and began to rise. We hit a stony track and dropped it again at once. Roads belong to someone. We stayed with the trees. When we finally stopped, it was in a small hollow with a trickle of water running through leaves. We drank, washed our faces, cleaned mud from the lieutenant's wound. The cold made my jaw ache. My hands wouldn't hold still. I set the oilcloth book on a rock and stared at it like it might tell me which road led to daylight. "We can't carry all these pages in our heads," Keen said. "We have to choose." "Choose what?" Hensley asked. "What lives in the report," Keen said. "What disappears?" I felt the old weight of duty in a new weight that didn't have a uniform. "We say enemy ambush at the rail cut," I said. "We say we destroyed unmarked supply. We say our officer was wounded and is stable. We say we could not pursue." Hensley nodded. "Simple, clean." Keen looked at the lieutenant. "You walk with that?" The lieutenant looked back at the book. "If you hand this up, it doesn't surface again. If you burn it, you kill a truth you'll need later. If you hide it, you become the thing they fear most." "What's that?" I asked. "A witness who learned to keep his own ledger," he said. He lay back and stared at the canopy. "If they ask, you found crates of spare parts you couldn't identify. If they press, you say the blast took it. You do not mention hands without flags. You do not mention quiet corridors. You do not say the word fortress." "Then what do we say about where we were?" Hensley asked. The lieutenant closed his eyes. "Fog." A wind moved through the trees like someone turning a page. Keen gave me a long look. "We keep the book," he said. "We file the rest as smoke." I put the book back under my shirt. It felt heavier than before, like it had soaked up more than water. We moved again at dusk. Night made the woods kind. You can pass a dozen men at 10 yards and never know it if both of you respect the dark. We reached a ridge that faced west. Lights pricked the distance where our lines held. We crossed a small meadow, then a gully, then hit the back wire of our own post and gave the sign. The sentry stared at us like we were ghosts. "We thought you were gone," he said. He lowered his rifle and added softer, "Welcome back." Inside the wire, the world narrowed to old rules. A medic checked the lieutenant and swore about the field stitch, then grudgingly said it would do. He tagged him for the aid station and asked for forms. Keen filled the report in slow, neat letters that would hold up under questions. I stood by the tent flap and watched a cook pour coffee that smelled like burnt bread and salvation. We handed in what we had to hand in. The map from the truck glove box, the tin with the strange stamp, a coil of cable. We logged the charges used at the cut. We logged 2 dead privates by name. We logged engagement with hostile force, medium fire, unknown numbers, small arms, and 1 modified light. We logged a disabled vehicle of unknown type. It all looked right on paper. It even sounded right when we read it out loud. The oilcloth book never left my body. Sleep came like a shove. I dropped into it and fell to the bottom. When I surfaced, pale light pressed against the tent, and the air smelled like damp canvas and coffee again. Keen sat on an ammo crate outside, smoking the stub of something I knew he'd been saving. He handed me a mug and didn't say a word. We watched the sky try to turn blue. Orders came later that day. 2 transfers. Hensley to a logistics unit up the road. Keen and I to another sector. 3 ridges east, no reason given. The lieutenant went to the rear on a truck that rattled like a drawer full of cutlery. He didn't look at us when he left. He stared at his boots like he was learning them again. By evening, rumor walked our line like a drunk with a lantern. Some said a convoy had gone missing near the rail cut. Others said there was a friendly fire report with no bodies. A few believed there had been no convoy at all. The story changed each time a new mouth told it. That was the point. If everyone holds a different piece, no one has the whole. Before we stepped off for the new sector, a runner found us with a sealed envelope. No sender. Inside was a single line on a small card in a block hand I didn't know. Stay off the corridors. I folded it twice and pushed it deep in my pocket. Keen watched me do it and didn't ask. We marched out under a sky that couldn't decide whether to rain. The ground had the same old mud, the same old roots to catch your toes, the same old smell of wet leaves and iron. The line looked like every line. The men looked like every set of faces I'd known and lost. The war kept grinding forward, patient and dull, sure it would outlast all of us. That night I opened the oilcloth book by candle stub and copied 3 pages into my own small notebook. I kept my letters simple and clear, not for the record, not for a court, but for the day my memory might fail my hands. Then I wrapped both books and slid them into the false bottom of my pack. I stitched the seams shut with coarse thread. I burned the loose ends with the candle and pressed the warm wax flat with my thumb. When I lay back, the canvas smelled like smoke and soap and old sweat. My bones felt hollow, like the hum had found a home inside them. Keen rolled once in his blankets and went still. Rain began to tick on the tent like someone tapping a code they knew we couldn't read. In the morning, we would go where the map told us. We would hold what it asked us to hold. We would give the same answers when the same questions came. But the book would keep breathing under canvas, quiet as a second heart. And as we drifted into the kind of sleep soldiers get, thin, shallow, waiting for the next voice I knew, there was one more thing I had to do before any of this could end. The rain didn't stop for 2 days. It turned every trench into a gutter and every track into a swamp. We marched east with wet packs, rifles wrapped in cloth, boots that squelched with each step. The war around us went on as it always did. Shells, orders, rations, and silence. But inside, nothing felt the same. The fortress, the book, the rail cut, all of it had changed the ground under my feet. At the new sector, the routine caught us quick. Dig in, string wire, check arcs, the kind of work that wears you down slow but keeps you alive. Men joked, men cursed, men stared at the sky waiting for the sound of artillery. They had no idea of corridors or circles on maps or trucks without flags. They were still fighting the war we were told about. Keen stayed close. He didn't talk much, but he didn't need to. We had carried the same weight out of that cut, and silence was the only way to hold it steady. At night, when the line went quiet, I could hear him breathing steady beside me, and that was enough to remind me I wasn't alone. Hensley wrote once from his new unit, a short letter, just 3 lines. Still alive, still hungry, still seeing things I shouldn't. Burn this. I read it twice, then fed it to the trench stove, watched the paper curl and blacken until nothing was left but ash. The lieutenant, I never saw him again. Word came weeks later that he'd been moved to a rear station, then nothing. Some men vanish into the noise of war and leave no trace behind. His name never reached the casualty board, never reached the promotions list, never reached anything at all. Like the fortresses, Like the maps, he became something that didn't exist. One evening, a courier dropped a sealed envelope on my bunk. No sender, no marks, just my name in clean block letters. I opened it and found a single page torn from a notebook. On it was a circle, faint pencil, the same hand that had drawn all the others. Inside the circle, one word: quiet. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. Keen leaned over, saw it, and nodded like he had been expecting it. He said nothing, and neither did I. We burned that page too. The war dragged on. Seasons turned, fronts shifted, new orders replaced old ones. But I kept the oilcloth book hidden. Every time I moved, I checked to make sure it was still there, stitched under canvas, riding with me through mud and smoke. Sometimes I thought about destroying it. Sometimes I thought about handing it up. But I did neither. I carried it because that was the only choice left. The last day of the war arrived without fanfare, only silence. No shells, no rifles, just the kind of stillness that feels wrong when you've lived too long with noise. Men cheered, some wept, some just lay down where they stood. I sat on my pack and pulled the book out for the first time in months. I turned a page and saw the names again, lists of men and women I would never know. Then I closed it. We were told to go home, to forget the things we'd seen, to rebuild the life waiting for us. But not everything comes off when you take the uniform off. Some things stay in your hands no matter what. Years later, I still hear the hum. Some nights it comes in my chest, steady and low, like a reminder that the corridors never closed. They only went quiet. I never told anyone outside our circle what happened in those valleys, those cuts, those walls of concrete and steel. The reports stayed clean, the papers stayed silent. But the book is still with me. I keep it wrapped in cloth, buried in a trunk no one opens but me. Pages dry, pencil faint, but alive. A witness on paper, same as in my head. I know one day someone will find it. Maybe they'll understand it better than I did. Maybe they'll see that wars are never only about lines on maps, but about the things buried under them, the trades made in the dark, the corridors where no one is supposed to walk. Until then, I carry the memory like a scar, not visible, not spoken, but always there. We left the fortress behind. We left the lieutenant in silence. We left the unmarked trucks to their roads. But we carried something out with us, something heavier than crates or rifles. And that is why, when people ask me where I fought, I don't name the ridge or the valley. I don't list the battles or the towns. I just say this: I was there. The day the enemy lost the fight at the Forgotten Fortress, and the day I learned the war we were told about was only half the truth. You're still watching without subscribing? Make sure you don't miss the next story. Subscribe now and share with your friends. Tell us your country, the time you're watching, and any real-life incident like this, then post it in the comments.